Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa man wala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let's pick it up where we stopped last time, talking about these frames for defining terms and how this is going to apply to Usul al-Fiqh through a compound or a technical frame. Here, Imam al-Haramain, this is the beginning of his text. He says, هذه ورقات, these pages, تشتمل contain على معرفة فصول من أصول الفقه, some of the knowledge of Usul al-Fiqh, certain sections related to the subject of Usul al-Fiqh. وذلك أي أصول الفقه مؤلف, أي ذلك اللفظ مؤلف من جزئين مفردين. This term Usul al-Fiqh is composed of two separate parts. So let's look at how that works. When you say compound or idafa, what we're talking about now is this approach to defining Usul al-Fiqh using two words. Honestly, it's not that important, but let's just go through it for the sake of barakah wal khair, inshallah. So number one, a term formed by combining two or more words is called murakkab. Okay? Usul fiqh. Another word for it, if you study grammar, is idafa, the possessive. Mudaf, mudafun ilay. Rasulullahi, the messenger of Allah. Baytullahi, the house of Allah. Abdullahi, the servant of Allah. Usul fiqh, the foundations of fiqh. So the first term is called aslu, or what's known as mudaf, what's possessed. The second term is al-fiqh, is the mudafun ilay, the possessor. Okay? Example like asasul bayt, the foundations of a house. So let's look at this term as a compound term and break down the components. Number one, usul, which is the plural of asl. Right after that, you see el, the definite article. Fiqh, foundations of the fiqh. So foundations or principles of Islamic jurisprudence. Let's look at the word asl. Let's break down each component of this type of definition. This murakkabi, mudafi, attempt to take both words as a combined definition. So let's look at the first word in this term usul al-fiqh, al-asl. He says al-asl ma buniya alayhi ghayruhu. Asl is that which something else is built. So this definition captures the essence of what a foundation is. It's the base upon which other elements depend or are constructed. It represents the starting point or the core that supports what comes after it. The anonym of that is going to be al-fara'. And so what I'm doing now, this actually is the waraqat, guys. This is the text. We're doing it a very different way, again, to kind of facilitate things for you. وَالْفَرَعْ مَا يُبْنَى عَلَيْهِ غَيْرُهُ. So the opposite of asl is fara'. And a branch is that which is built upon something else. The opposite relationship that we find with asl. You see it like this. Here's some examples. The foundation of a wall. Asas. Al-qawa'id. وإذ يرفع إبراهيم القواعد من البيت وإسماعيل ربنا تقبل منا. When Abraham and his son laid qawa'id, the foundations of the house. The usul al-shajara, the roots of a tree. Now we have usul al-fiqh. Everything's built on it when it comes to fiqh. There's some other less accurate usages of the word asl that are provided by certain scholars. We don't need to go through that now. The most accurate is that upon which something else is built. Now let's talk about the word fiqh. The linguistic definition of fiqh in Arabic, fiqh means al-fahm, to understand. Although there are some scholars that said fiqh is a little different than fahm because it means to understand subtleties. We'll talk about that in later texts. And I may address that in the course you find now up on YouTube. It refers to the deep comprehension of something beyond mere surface knowledge. It implies insight and discernment that leads to true understanding. So the Prophet, in the famous supplication he made for Ibn Abbas, his nephew, may Allah be pleased with him, and his father, O Allah, faqihhu fid din. O Allah, grant him deep understanding of the religion. Imam al-Haramain in the Waraqat, he defines fiqh as what? Ma'rifatul ahkam al-shar'iyyah allati طريقها أي طريق استنباطها الاجتهاد. Fiqh is the knowledge of Islamic legal rulings which are derived through scholarly effort. Within that, there are some key words. So here we have fiqh. Linguistically, what we're worried about is its technical definition because we're going to marry it with usul fiqh. Usul fiqh. All right. Number one, ma'rifah, which means knowledge. And that is closer to probability than certainty. You say al-urf is a smell. فعرف الناشر is a permeating smell. So when you smell something, you're gaining evidence on what it really is. So ma'rifah is the acquired information that leads us to a definitive conclusion, a tasdiq or takdib. So that's why we say the word ma'rifah contains probability more than certainty. It's important for understanding why there's a flexibility in scholarly arguments and differences, reflecting the nature of juristic reasoning. Oftentimes when I teach this class, people say, I want to know the definitive right answer. There's right answers because of the nature of the science. So ma'rifah of what? The knowledge of legal rulings, sharia rulings, al-ahkam al-shar'iyyah, as opposed to rational or sensory judgments. Like, I know when I go outside, if it's cold, I put on a sweater. I don't need to ask you the dalil from Quran and Sunnah for that. I know that half of 100 is 50. I'll say, had the dalil ala hada. And finally, al-ijtihad, he says, tariqah al-ijtihad, the process of exerting maximum scholarly effort to derive rulings from the sources of Islamic law. So here we see the technical definition of fiqh. Fiqh is the knowledge of the legal rulings which are derived from scholarly effort. Notice something Imam Haramain didn't do. He didn't give you the technical definition of usul. Huh? What this definition encompasses, usul al-fiqh, knowledge of rulings reached through scholarly interpretation, understanding, for example, that prayers require intention, knowing that witr prayer is highly recommended. Not usul al-fiqh, fiqh. Knowledge of rulings reached through scholarly interpretation. So, for example, understanding that prayer requires niyyah, knowing that witr prayer is highly recommended or wajib according to the Hanafis, determining whether zakat is obligatory on jewelry, matters where scholars may legitimately differ. It excludes what? Self-evident religious knowledge known by all Muslims, like God is one, the Prophet is the final prophet. Because that type of knowledge, right? That type of knowledge is not going to be probable. It's self-evident. معلوم أن الدين بالضرورة. Knowledge that the 5 daily prayers are obligatory. Don't say that's fiqh, that's sharia. So sharia is definitive. Fiqh is largely the outcome of probabilities that were investigated, negotiated, and defended and concluded. Pay attention. Knowledge that adultery is prohibited, matters of creed and belief that are foundational, knowledge of God and his attributes at a foundational level. So we'll talk about the scope of fiqh according to Imam al-Haramain. Definitions of fiqh as knowledge of Islamic legal rulings derived through scholarly effort. We can clearly distinguish what falls within the scope of fiqh and then what lies outside of it. That's why it's called had. Its definition, had, is a border, because when you understand the definition, the had of something, you know now the scope of what falls in and what lies outside. You've bordered it. So you've disciplined yourself. So when he says which are derived through scholarly effort, this is crucial in determining the borders of fiqh. So that's why you say 5 daily prayers isn't fiqh. That's outside of it. That's sharia. Drinking alcohol isn't fiqh. That's clearly defined by the sharia. It's outside of its sort of, if you will, probability, because those things are definitive. All right. So included in fiqh, and we gave these examples right there, are those things which are the outcome of ijtihad. What's outside of it, things related to sharia. So when we understand that scope, we can say now that fiqh is the knowledge of Islamic legal rulings derived through scholarly effort. We can now understand what falls within, what falls outside of it. And that's why that part, التي طريقها الاجتهاد, is so crucial. It acts as a limiter. It acts as a limiter. So the true dominion of fiqh is where scholarly interpretation is needed to derive rulings from texts that are not explicitly clear or whose authenticity is debated, or when there is no text, allowing for legitimate differences of opinion amongst qualified scholars. Pay attention, I added something here you don't see in this definition. The true domain of fiqh is where scholarly interpretation is essential to derive rulings from texts that are not explicitly clear. There's debate over the authenticity of those texts, or there is no text. You don't see that here, so you want to make sure you write that down. Next time we'll talk about the technical definition of Usul al-Fiqh. We now did the compound definition, but let's bring it together before we jump into that technical definition for next time. So Usul, in the technical sense, which he did not define, means what? Evidences and how to use them. Evidences and the rules that govern how to employ them. That's Usul. And who's qualified to employ them? That's Usul al-Fiqh. So Usul, Fiqh. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in khair. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.